Welcome back to another week of Mark's Headroom. It's going to be different. The same thing I'm bringing each week is the time that I'm breaking my fast, 5-day fast. And this week, I'm going to talk about what it was like to break the fast last week, because it was really an exploration of consciousness and quite fascinating. Try to limit myself to that today. For some reason, I feel like needs to be the focus. But I will mention right off the bat that over the past few weeks, I've compiled several books that I've written over the years, and I've published 11 of those on KDP. And I found that to be very interesting. I think doing this channel, Mark's Headroom, was helpful in an odd way. Maybe difficult to communicate to a common person, but if you're listening or you're one of the 100 subscribers, maybe this is for you. It's not for everyone. I don't think this is necessarily the commercial audience that anyone in the world is looking for. But this has been a powerful week for me. But going back to the breaking the fast last week, I went down with a group of old acquaintances, friends of a partner of mine, and in South Texas, not too far from where all those people died this summer in the floods. And I broke my fast around them in the evening. And most of them are super, highly educated, mostly affluent people. And it was quite an experience, because I tend to isolate during the time that I'm breaking the fast. Part of that reason that I isolate is to just explore what's going on inside of me during that time, and also give my body a chance to kind of respond to the food that I'm intaking, and let my digestive system wake up. And I really don't know exactly how it's going to unfold. It seems to be even though I'll try the same thing like week after week, it can happen entirely differently. So I think that there's a lot of influence from the energies in the environment around me, probably as well as the solar system, I like to think, or the galaxy, the planets that are channeling energy through the Earth. And then, of course, I'm also bringing, some of the experiences from the week for examination in that time period, where it's become a real crystal clear period for me to investigate what's going on around me as I'm breaking the fast. And it's interesting to watch my attention and to see what circumstances present themselves, and how others are in this particular setting. It was interesting to see how others responded to me learning what I have done for over 4 years now in this fasting pattern that I've got. One person who is, highly successful and conformed, and, has a very, the conventional routine in Austin, asked me, are you all right, on Saturday morning, when I'd been, kind of off by their standards on Friday night. And in fact, on Saturday morning, I was still struggling, because the sleeping quarters that we had there were not the best for me. And I found myself being asked to play a certain role there. And I tried to honor everything with dignity and hold myself up the best that I could, and to be honest with myself, and to be present for others in the group that had some expectations, of that I thought were fair and worthy for me to meet them halfway the best that I could physically and emotionally and psychologically in that atmosphere. And because I had no intent of turning this into a battle of consciousness this or traditional lifestyle this way or that way. I'm not defending anything other than my choice is to move forward. And people were very have been very tolerant of my eccentricities in this group and very supportive of some of the things I presented early on as things that I needed to deal with and recover from, and that happened to me in my life. It's interesting now that the place that I'm at, it feels like a full recovery. In fact, it seems like a place where I can work from that I think is exceptionally unique. I don't think there's many other people that I've encountered in my life who have the view that I've kind of I don't know, curated, which is the ability to kind of see an organism, a form, a bioform of someone without a lot of my own. I like to think I've developed a very unique perspective of viewing someone and experiencing, what they're presenting to me, what they're feeling and encountering in their state, as well as where they are in their entire development process in their life. So it was fascinating to have a contrast to my experiences with these other people who I don't see regularly, but had this a mutual set of trust and insight into what is going on in their lives and who they are, how they operate, and kind of the routine patterns that they present. And to experience that in this fasted state and then begin breaking the fast. And it so happens that I had a lot of history in the area of Texas where this event was occurring this weekend. And a lot of it was related to my oil and gas experience and encounters that I had with Texas culture, big power culture. I mean, I met people that are, the rich and famous down there in that King Ranch area of South Texas. And they kind of kicked me around when I was in my late 20s. But they recognized my intelligence, so I was good at what I was doing. I stood up for myself. I think if I was doing this all over again or was sending someone in to do that, well, I don't know that I would have encouraged anyone to do anything like I've done in my life in that particular situation and setting. Or, I mean, I never encouraged any of my kids to necessarily follow in my footsteps, except for the examination of what would really make them happy and to encourage them to keep their options open as long as they could, to find themselves and establish a path toward what they should hopefully be able to discover as a satisfying life, built around, some freedom and choices that they could make for themselves to find out and express who they are and why they're here. And all three of the people that I brought up or was responsible for from inception have done that. I think of the other 5 that I've raised, there's a couple that are pursuing that. There's 3 that are actually from that area that I was in, and from some of those, super rich, backgrounds that are flailing with in the wind with some of the conformity that they kind of deal with without really even understanding or making an effort to understand, to the best of my knowledge, what is really going on. So, but I find myself in a situation where people are interested in, some of them are asking, good questions. But then I go back and realize that some of the things that I'm speaking about or beginning to speak about are really in their infant stage. And, this channel has been helpful to develop a little bit of the vocabulary and dialogue, some of the limits about what's possible to explain. And, I think it's difficult to explain it to the camera. And I really do miss some of the comments that I had been getting from it on occasion from people to relate. And I'm not surprised that the circulation by the algorithm, is rather limited for this Mark's Headroom channel. My Transcendent channel is at the point of taking off. It looks like it's been getting a lot of viewer hours, and there's enough subscribers to really potentially even make it a commercial, or somewhat of a commercial project. I don't know that it's anywhere close to being a profitable project, but at least it looks like it may be beginning to enter the state of its existence in the YouTube world that would allow it to at least get a little bit of income from some of the AdSense revenue, which is kind of cool. But I still find that, this breaking the fast is a period of really, can be very insightful. So you might even try this on a short-term basis of, going a day or a half day, just missing a meal, and then watching what happens whenever you begin to feed yourself. And because it is really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. When you clean out your system and allow your body to be in a more purely organic state, unaffected by some of the things that we're feeding our bodies so commonly here on the planet today, to find an angle of, for lack of better words, it's called consciousness, but a viewpoint of that's not necessarily tied to an identity that is, conformed through or built through, relationships in society, but more of a relationship with God or the universe or the environment that is more purely related to, just who you are, and you drop yourself in like an alien into this scene that I was last Friday, a week ago. And it can kind of blow your mind. I really felt strongly the pull to provide answers to questions that were asked that would, in some cases, please people, or to respond to biases or prejudices that they were presenting. And I found myself operating with some distance. And an interesting thing happened. I got really angry. But the things I got really angry about were historical things that I had experienced in this part of Texas about a little over 30 years ago. And the memories came back like out of the woodwork. It's almost like there were entities around me that were reminding me of experiences that I had out there. Fortunately, there was a trusted person that I was I was actually having a part of dinner, a very carefully curated dinner with at the side of this group. And he'd spent a lot of time in this area doing some motorcycle, recreational riding and so forth. And so he opened the door for me to really feel and relate about what I was experiencing from the people in the area, as well as today, or last Friday, as well as in my sordid past, dealing with the rich and powerful, and some of them famous down in that area, who had come across during my career in oil and gas down there. And that was pretty cool, pretty fascinating. And I've had an emotional outrage that came out. And then another one of these men that I've known for quite a while, that I have a trustworthy relationship with at an emotional, personal level. In fact, he is a psychologist himself, and has been in that field. His father was in that field as well. And, I found myself really venting some deep emotional stuff that I'd never really had a chance to speak of before. Because so many of my experiences led me to believe that I needed to be quiet, and that if I said something about some of the events that were happening, that I would be either killed, or I would suffer severe consequences, or my family would suffer consequences. And that goes back even into my infancy, because my father's life, my family was threatened by organized crime when he made some big drug bust of the Mexican drug cartel that were dropping, I think, marijuana in the Ozarks back in the day. And the locals were gathering it. And then, of course, you're on Route 66 in the area around Springfield, Missouri, where I grew up. And it was being transported to the major cities and distributed. So there was a lot of pressure on him. And I say a lot of pressure, I'm putting it mildly. There were threats. And so it's interesting to hear some of this stuff that you might, if you watch Ozark, the Netflix show with Justin Bateman, and watch what they portray, through several seasons on Lake of the Ozarks, which is not too far from Springfield. That I lived through a lot of that kind of drama and threats, and nonetheless, I felt all that. And then years later, when I came to Texas, I felt threats from some of since I could see through some of these things, I think it just invited people to, sometimes they weren't sure if I really understood, or if I was, what I was going to do. I've never really been a whistleblower or a tattletale. I was always, someone that was observing and just trying to soak it all up for some reason. And I think the reason is probably, partially, this, like Mark's Headroom, where I could share and come into the power, not in trying to, pose some sense of morality, or, bring people down, but through like the first 2 books of this 11-book series that I wrote really deal with the evolution of consciousness, and letting it skip into a, beyond the polarity that people are really stuck in with this intellectualism and these wars of words and cleverness, entertainment, education, and trying to get it right, to this level above that, where you can actually see a different view as a human being, where I think we're probably going. Eventually, I think there'll be more people that could join me or you. Not that I'm putting myself above anything, because everything could get wiped out and we could start all over if there's not a collective new platform for us to begin to operate from. And that's kind of where I go with that book series, is trying to set, through a fictional account, but to illustrate the path and the narrative that is really necessary to develop this platform where we can honor our spirituality and our relationships and what we're really here for, and tune into that. Because by and large, the algorithm and the patterns that have been planted in this narrative that comprises much of the behaviors of societies across the globe, across all the bubbles, is an aspiration toward something, and then feelings of injustice and suffering and some people of entitlement. And that doesn't serve the future generations. And it historically has led to some destruction. Nonetheless, we're still here and we can survive some of that. But so it's not like you're fighting against any particular, this or that in the polarity. And I'm not one to talk or to try to encourage people to operate from what do they call it, a non-binary I'm not, to be involved in life is necessary and is essential to using those life lessons to learn to transcend and understand the polarity. And that gives you a viewpoint as your nervous system develops and you come into understanding what's going on without reacting to the group like I did last week, but recognizing the pains that are felt there. The pains are not necessarily real. Some of those are just conditions of programming that we picked up in early childhood that create a condition of seemingly pain or suffering. And once you get to a certain point, you can transcend those. And I can't tell you exactly how to do that. I mean, it would depend on who was sitting here in front of me as to what kind of path we might really take to delve into that and try to understand it. But I think that's a very intimate, by our standards today, that's a very intimate relationship and process, one that takes a lot of trust and respect and some really keen listening and perception and observation. And it's funny because you can run across some people that are not super highly educated or have spent time in meditation or anything, but you'll come across someone who's been through a hard life more times than not, and they have an understanding. They have a thirst for that kind of information. I'm speaking to people on YouTube and Substack, and maybe some of us will go out to TikTok, and who knows? It's kind of random as to who might pick this up because I don't think there's a commercial demographic that necessarily are looking for this message or this understanding, but it is one of what I've come to understand as charity. And I say that using a definition of charity that I picked up on from the King James Bible when I was a little kid, probably 4 or 5 years old, because first, like it's I think 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the book on well, they call it the book on love, but love and charity were words that were interchanged in some of that scripture. And the purest love is one that is not bargained for. And that's one where you're just operating from what seems to be guidance from your heart, which I trust has some intelligence from the universe embedded alongside it. I think that's a beautiful place to be and to operate. So trying to scan here and see if there's anything more I feel like would be beneficial to say today. I'm not going to try to stretch this out into some, hour-long or long-form video, but I continue to watch for feedback and for some signs of how this might be impacting others or not, and looking for that for guidance as I continue to throw this period of my life out there for others, realizing that by definition this is probably one of the most unique spillages of information, viewpoint, concern for his fellow man that it would be possible. And I feel like it is, kind of by the grace of God that I'm able to do this with a small studio set up here in Austin, and to continue to have some of the supports that I do recognize that I have around me that make this possible. So I hope you all have a great week, and I know I had a really strong, deep week um, between last Friday and now, and I'm going to go break my fast right now. See you next week.